Sure. Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is 6:08. Has this meeting been noticed?
The meeting has been posted and noticed according to law.
Thank you. Looks like all trustees are present. We have two agenda items for tonight, and we will, at the end of the presentation for our first agenda item, we will take questions from the board members and then open it up to the public if there's any questions. And then if we have time, we'll get to our second agenda item today. So our first agenda item is presentation from the Shorewood School District on proposed referendum. And thank you so much for being here. Is there a second way to
It's up to you, and people are welcome to move their chairs around so you can see PowerPoint.
All right, great. Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you for having us here tonight. I really appreciate it. My name is Brian Davis, and I'm the proud superintendent of the Shorewood School District. Back in October, President Harvey Shaw and I were invited to come here to share with you our work that we've been doing on our facilities planning over the last 2.5 years. And so tonight we're going to give you that background information and then be able to open it up to some conversations. Specifically, we were looking at our components of our school survey and referendum process, our costs associated with our components of our proposed improvements, the scheduling of our improvements, and how those play themselves out over time, potentially, and then the impact on the taxpayers of the village based on those potential improvements. So President Shaw and I brought with us some support staff to help you with our learning tonight, because that's what we're approaching this as, just a learning opportunity to collaborate and ask questions, get some clarification. So I just want to introduce those people. So one, we have Ted Knight, who's our Chief Advancement Officer for the district. He's in charge of our communications department. So Ted, you want to raise your hand? Patrick Miller is our Director of Business Services and Human Resources, in charge of facility planning and facilities improvements. Michelle Weiberg is our financial consultant. She works for PMA Financial Network and is the Senior Vice President and Director of the Wisconsin office. So thank you for being here, Michelle. So my understanding is we have about 45 minutes to present information tonight and then answer questions. We'll start with President Shaw presenting an overview of the work, again, that we've done over the last 2.5 years. Ted's going to talk a little bit about our surveying process and how we've been able to solicit feedback from the community during that 2.5 years. Patrick's going to talk about scheduling the projects potentially as they would come up. And then Michelle will finish up our presentation discussing the impact of taxpayers, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at that point. So with that, President Shaw.
Welcome.
Where do you want to do that?
Let's see if I can do this to my back. So all the information I'm going to share today has been presented over the last 2.5 years in a variety of formats, and is all available on our website. And so if you have things that you guys have all gotten a copy of this presentation. So I just wanted to briefly go over what we've been doing as a board over the last 2.5 years around facilities. So we really saw this planning process as having two components. One is to spend time figuring out what the needs are of our district. So we spent about a year looking at the long-term and near-term needs of our facility. And this was really run by the district. We hired a firm to do this, get a sense of what we have and what we don't, and what is still missing or that needs improvement. And then the second component of this was really to then come up with a plan. How are we going to implement a plan that could address these needs? And so this is kind of the diagram that we've shown multiple times, just looking at like how we started with learning and exploring really as the first part of this. And this is where we had a lot of community engagement. So many of you might have been at the first meeting, which was in February of 2016. And since then have kind of gone through had different opportunities for the community to come back and provide us with some information. And a lot of this was really what we would say is district-led. So the board charged the district with doing this work and bringing back the report to us. The result of this work was that we came up with, that our community and our staff identified 4 priorities in our efforts to improve our historic buildings. So the first is capital maintenance, so looking at some of the work that needs to be done in our historic over 100-year-old buildings. Safety and security has been a concern in terms of ensuring that we have secure entrances and that this is one of our priorities in terms of ensuring that all of our students are safe. ADA compliance, so because our buildings are older, not all of our spaces are ADA compliant. So for example, and during this process I had broken my ankle, so I had firsthand experience about things like this step right here, which makes it difficult for people to get around. So thinking about that in our schools. And then classroom and support areas. Thinking about flexible learning spaces. How can we create spaces that fit within what our curriculum is doing around expeditionary learning, active learning, and flexible classrooms. And so what the board did with this information starting in November of 2017 was started meeting and talking about how do we prioritize what we got. Oh, thank you. Oops. Wait, what? Yeah. Starting thinking about how to prioritize these and also getting costing around this, right? So really the beginning of this was thinking about what could we do if we could do everything, right? And then thinking about what are the costs going to be associated with some of these projects. And so between November of 2017 and November of 2018, the board met 20 times to talk about this, met with our contractors, took this information back to the community, took this information back to staff, and tried to get at a list of priority areas. And so one of the things that we did as a result of this was organize a community advisory group that we called our FACT team, and they also provided us feedback on these. So there were about 20, some of the people in this room were on that, giving us valuable responsive feedback about two things. One, what those priority areas were, and also how to organize and develop our survey. They were instrumental in helping us think through the best way for the survey that I think all of you should have gotten in terms of providing information, giving the most clear information, and then how to organize the projects within that survey. So the next couple slides I'm going to share are really directly from our survey. And we're thinking about two potential referendum questions. So the first is funding support for ongoing and annual maintenance. And so, as I think all of you know, due to kind of constraints from the state, the district has been constrained in terms of how much money we can spend on maintenance and ongoing maintenance. And so one of the questions is really looking at whether to ask for a $275,000 per year referendum that would help us with ongoing maintenance. Right. The purpose of this is really to ensure that we can keep our high quality programming, pay our staff well, and retain and recruit the best staff, but still start addressing some of the needs that we have in terms of maintenance. The second question is about what we're calling a capital referendum project. And here, based on the feedback we got from staff and the FACT team and from community members, we organized this around in a couple of ways. So the first is what we called our critical infrastructure project for all schools. So this is a project that would touch all 4 campuses and addresses the safety and security, the ADA compliance, and the building up infrastructure and systems in all of those places. And this had a price tag of approximately $55 million. And then there were additional projects for every school that people were interested in. And so then we looked at those separately, and as you guys saw in the survey, we asked these questions in a way so that people could prioritize what they thought was important. So the first one was the elementary academic projects, looking at Atwater and Lake Bluff independently, so thinking about some of the things that the teachers suggested that needed to be addressed in those places in terms of the classroom sizes, the library, lighting and furniture. In the intermediate school, we also looked at renovating some of the classrooms, adding windows in some of the classrooms, reconfiguring the locker spaces. So all of these were things that really came directly from teachers and from community residents as the priorities they had in those buildings. In the high school, we looked at 3 possible projects. The first was renovating the main academic building. So this building was built in 1924, and again, thinking about expanding the spaces, making them more student-friendly, and creating spaces where students could actually work together. The second one was looking specifically at the performing arts building. So here, adding additional spaces that would create a commons multi-purpose space for student activities or for large group instruction, adding band and choir space, right? So I think one of the things that we heard back from the performing arts teachers was that some of the spaces that we have in there are not ideal for the kind of instruction they wanted to be able to give. And then the last one was this idea of, we called it the student union. So creating a student union in the arts and sciences building where students could gather. This was kind of coming back, again, from students who felt like the current cafeteria space was a place that they didn't want to use or didn't use. And so is there a way for us to rethink how we use that space to create a space for students to really congregate and have a place to have some of their group work or things like that, right? And so we ended the survey with information about, right, like the operational and capital referendum in terms of total cost. And then, so the total cost, from the first assessment we got was $112 million. And then the board went back and said, okay, that's a cost, that's a ticket that we are not going to be able to sell to our community. And so we went back and we were able to get it down to $90.5 million. And so we wanted just to share with people in the survey, like, what this would look like in terms of the different projects. Again, we asked them to give us some feedback in terms of what they prioritized. And then the last question was really getting at this idea of, like, okay, so, everybody, I would say that everybody we talked to as a board and in all the meetings we had want our schools to be better, want our schools to be updated. But not everybody understood or wants to spend the $90 million, which I think is fair, right? So we wanted to give people more information about what the different costs would be. And so we asked them this question and gave them 5 options. 55 million, 65 million, 75, 85, and then the 90.5, just to get a sense of what people were thinking. And Ted will talk a little bit about our first wave of the survey in terms of what we got. But so that was the point of that survey, was to get both priority areas and then a sense of where people felt comfortable in terms of the tax increase that they would face.
And the tax increases at the bottom.
Yes, so on the bottom it gives you I can't read what it's on my notes, the total tax increase per $100,000 of property tax. And so I think we talked about this last time. The median value of a home in Shorewood is about $325,000, $350,000. So you would multiply those numbers by 3-ish for the median value. So, all right, I'm going to have Ted come up and talk a little bit. Oh, wait, I guess I have one more thing, sorry. So the last part of this plan really then is between now and April, right? So where we're at now is, and Ted's going to talk about the survey, but once we get the survey results back, by the second meeting in January, the board will decide if we're going to put a referendum question on the ballot and what those referendum questions will be. And then the community gets to decide, right? So this is a vote that the community gets to make at the April 2nd, 2019, if we move forward with the ballot initiative. So I'm going to have Ted come up and talk a little bit about the survey.
So just as Paru mentioned, as part of the facilities planning process, the Shorewood School District partnered with an independent firm to distribute a survey to Shorewood residents to collect feedback regarding the district's facilities planning initiative. So the district first mailed out the survey at the beginning of October. However, we later determined that the mailing list that was used to distribute the survey was actually incomplete and that some household addresses were missing. So to resolve the situation, the district has worked with a mailing vendor to identify the households in Shorewood that were missing from the original mailing list. Those missing addresses have been identified, and at this point the facilities survey will be mailed to those households by early December to ensure that all Shorewood residents are given the opportunity to respond to the survey. That is absolutely our objective here, is to make sure that everyone living in Shorewood gets the chance to respond to that survey. So the survey respondents, when they receive the survey, will be given approximately 3 weeks to respond. So at this point, the survey is ongoing. Don't have the results yet for the survey to make sure that those people get a chance to respond. After all the survey results have been tallied, they will be reviewed first by the school board and shared with the community. The school board will then meet in January to consider resolutions for a possible referendum. So again, at this point, the district is absolutely committed to ensuring that all Shorewood residents are given the opportunity to complete the facility survey prior to any final decision.
Thank you.
All right, and now I'll have Patrick Miller come up and provide a little bit about the timeline for projects, where the bidding process would fit in, and so forth.
Thank you for having us tonight. I want to talk just a little bit about, and as I'm going to speak it, if the referendum were to pass in April, what is the process going forward? To get us up to this point, we've contracted with a construction manager, and a construction firm that has many, many years of experience in school referendum, school construction. And so as we developed these plans, they were able to put dollar estimates toward each of the projects that we were speaking of. And that helps us get to referendum amounts, referendum dollar amounts. Post-referendum, then, what we will actually do, if you could imagine, perhaps the pyramid upside down, we're going to take those plans that we have, and at first we're going to do a schematic design, which essentially means we're going to take our plans and we're going to begin to drill down deeper. We're going to come up with drawings, renderings, functional interior, exterior spaces that will help us get a greater definition to exactly what it's going to look like.
Patrick, how long will that process take? Like a year?
That process would take between 2 and 4 months. We've done a considerable amount of work in the last couple of years. I would anticipate that this schematic design process is going to take maybe 2 or 3 months.
For all the work?
Correct, because we've done an awful lot of work on the front end of this. But the estimation is between 2 and 4 months. From that point, then we go to design development, where we work with the construction manager and the architects together to come up with, again, more specific budget analyses, cost savings potentials with the way we're going to construct the buildings, the order in which we're going to construct the buildings. Again, we're putting drawings down and getting much deeper so that we can maintain maximum efficiency. Again, this process is going to take about 2 to 4 months. Here's where I would say, because of the scope of our project, I'm going to lean more towards the 4 months. Okay. And the third step then would be the construction documents. Here's where we're going to take those detailed design, the developed designs, and we're actually going to do the detailed bid packages for those of you who have been familiar with the construction process. This is going to be very detailed, with all of the electrical, all of the plumbing, all of the, any walls that are going to be constructed or walls that are to be moved, or all of that detail in the construction documents. These are going to be the documents that actually would be bid packets that would be sent out to contractors in the competitive bidding process.
Is that, I'm sorry, I'm going blind.
No, I apologize, it is very small.
2 to 4 months for that?
2 to 4 months to develop the construction documents.
Okay, we just went through this at the fire station, and that seems really short for this amount of work, but.
And again, there may be some additional time that's required in the construction document development, but I think we can save some time in the schematic design, because again, we spent considerable amount of time in the 2 years prior to us getting together tonight. So I think the total amount of time from schematic design, or I should say from referendum to us having the construction and bid documents should be about a year. I think it'll be a little shorter for the schematic design, might be a little longer for the actual bid documents, construction documents. Once we get to the end of those, once we have all those construction documents completed, that's when our construction management firm will assist the district in bidding out all of the projects. We work through a competitive bid process, all sealed bids, and
All at one time?
the actual process, we would look at the construction to determine if we can break some pieces apart. But we would bid out, you know, each different component, electrical components, plumbing components. You know, so there are gonna be multiple bids on this.
So like a hire a construction management firm, and then they will, for all projects that are in the 65 million, and then they will go and bid them out for like plumbing and all the subcontractors?
Right, the district will be overseeing that process, but the construction manager, management company will help us facilitate that. So the district has the ultimate decision, we make the final decision, they assist us in getting the documents out to the contractors and getting everything in and going through, the actual bid proposals. And at that point in time, that's when construction will begin. Now, this is a broad enough process or project that we're probably going to be at least in a 2-year construction phase. Okay. And so, as we work through that process, most likely there will be an initial borrow to go through the first year or year and a half of the construction process, and then a second borrow, still under the same referendum, to do the completed projects.
And what's your total timeline? Like, so all construction should be completed?
Total timeline, and again, we're way on the front end of this, so we don't have, you know, we're not gonna be able to have a definitive answer on that until we actually know what we're being allowed to do, and we get those construction documents in. But it should be, our contractors are estimating a 2-year process.
Two-year construction?
2-year construction process. Much of the construction will have to take place over the summer, but there is also, I mean, these are contractors that work in schools for a living, so they know how to get things done safely, even if school buildings are occupied. So there would be some work that would be able to be done during the school year, but again, a lion's share of the work would take place over the summer.
All right, and last we'll have Michelle Weber come up and talk about the finances and potential impacts based on the projects.
And you thought the font on the previous slide. So when we talked about the survey and the different amounts that were laid out in there were 5 different dollar amounts, as you recall. And the attempt to get down to this one tax impact is the challenge of putting a survey out into the community. The detail behind the one number, and the one number is what's in blue, so what you saw on your survey was a $55 million facilities referendum coupled with a $275,000 operating referendum has a 10-cent impact over what you're paying today. That's the one number you saw. 31 cents for the 65 million, 84 cents for 75 million.
What are you talking about?
$1.27 per thousand of,
Per thousand.
fair market
1,000,
value, for your property in Shorewood.
Okay, so if it was like a $300,000 house,
You would multiply that times $1.87 times 300, so it's per thousand. So you take the last 3 zeros off of your fair market value and multiply it times the tax impact we're showing. But the point here being, the blue numbers are what got on the survey. Putting this amount of detail on the survey, the thought, and this was discussed both at the board level and with the fact committee, would have been overwhelming. But this information was provided via a link on the survey. So we wanted to make sure that the information was out there. And if the community and the board decides to pursue a referendum, this is the kind of information that they'll keep putting in front of you. And I think this gets to this concept, and it's an important concept to understand, is that we're talking about an impact over what you're currently paying. There is a decrease in the tax rate if a referendum were to not be successful. So if we break up the table on top, we see the first line is the current debt service mill rate, or the component of the mill rate for debt service, either that is currently due in that year or prepayment of existing debt. That's what the village, or what the school district has been doing. So they've targeted a consistent overall mill rate of about $13.88. This is the component of it that is just for debt, $2.95. The gross impact of a facilities question for $55 million is $1.99. That existing mill rate of $2.95 is expected to go down $2.13. So when we look at a $1.99 impact of a new borrowing and the fact that the mill rate will go down for existing debt by $2.13, the net impact for that scenario is actually a decrease of 14 cents.
can you just summarize for us, because I know this is going to be a question. When I read the chart, I can understand it, but it's not clear to me. What, for that level of borrowing, so you have, I can't see for this far, but $275,000 for operating, and then like a 35 million or 65 million.
55 million
Yeah, that
is
would
the
be-
first.
Yep, so
on
could
the
you
left.
just tell me, without retiring that debt, what does that cost us?
Yeah, so that would be the facilities gross impact, which is the first red line.
I-
So $1.99 for the 55 million and 24 cents for the operating piece would be the combined impact of that sort of package if it were to go to referendum, not taking into consideration the fact that taxes would go down. The
Right.
net impact is the 10 cents. So
That's
the gross impact is the $1.99 and the 24 cents.
And
So,
how much is that per $300,000 household?
so that is $2.23, right, times 300. So
$30.
So can you just, Mark, can you just round that for me?
I don't have a calculator.
So it's approximately $10 on the 100, I mean, on that, $10.
What's this line D
Yeah, but they're saying
represent?
gross.
Oh, gross, all right.
Line,
223 times 300?
it is the net impact of the facilities question, plus the operating question, so it's $3.05. He just asked what D was. So that is, we're at $2.95 now,
So from
you'd
our,
be at $3.05, which is a difference of 10 cents.
so from the way that I think the village is accustomed to looking at that, $3.05 a thousand impact would be about $900,000 typical, or $900.
No.
She said it's 10.
It was,
Correct.
The net is
The
10 cents.
net.
that would be 10.
$670.
So that's the new
$199
borrowing
plus the
cost, okay.
24, for a $300,000 house is $670.
And you pay that year after year over 24 years?
Correct.
No, the 24 cents goes on forever.
Well, that does not have a sunset, correct?
Yes, okay.
Correct, yes. So the term of the debt is expected to be about 24 years, so that impact, it's not, it doesn't build on each other, it's not cumulative, it's, you're currently at $13.88 for your school tax rate, all else being equal. If that first package were to be passed, you'd be at $13.98 for your school tax rate, for the foreseeable future, all else being equal. So we have assumed 0 growth in the equalized valuation for these estimates. So again, any change there, the tax rate would be lower, but. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
So it's between 600 and 900 from day one. As soon as you borrow, that year it hits the tax bill. There'll be, just like we retire debt, you're saying you retire debt, but this is the new debt cost. If there was no new debt, or maybe $20 million, less, then you would maybe see a savings on your tax bill.
Your taxes would go down, yes, unless the district continued to prepay debt, which is, that's a board decision. Debt service levy is outside of revenue limits, and they can decide to prepay debt, and not decrease the tax rate immediately, but the debt service as scheduled would decrease. And again, we want to show that, and we're trying to show that here, but I don't know if you put that page in a survey. Again, the link was in the survey, so if people wanted more information, it was there. But again, as if the district does decide to go to referendum, I think this is something you'll continue to see. So, although we'll only have one option, it will make it a lot easier, but we'll continue to be talking about it in next round. So.
Can I just, for the prepayment, I mean, this is for President Shaw, was that what the $800,000 of increased tax levy this year for the school was for, to prepay debt, or was that for something else?
A portion of it, I believe, they are levying additional funds this year to continue to prepay debt.
And that's
Yes.
outside the
I
revenue.
don't know exactly what piece of the overall levy is for that purpose, but certainly that methodology is still being used to prepay debt. And I can say, I work with about 50 school districts in Wisconsin, and it is a widely used tool, quote unquote, to manage the overall mill rate or levy and prepay debt as a board decision. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Do you want us to open it? Yeah. Okay, so I have some questions, but I'll hold them until the rest of the board has a chance. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question tonight? Trustee Carpenter.
So I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of residents in the last 2 years, and I would say that the very #1 issue that every resident on every door that I've talked to has said is taxes. There are people who have chosen to leave the village, can't afford to move into our community because of taxes. And so I think for me, hearing that sentiment over and over and over again, I have some serious concerns about the 24-year repayment plan and such an increase in taxes when we have an opportunity to really decrease taxes and make our community a lot more affordable. So in connection with lower enrollment, and, so that's sort of where my concerns and my questions lie.
So what's the question?
Well, I guess taking on such a huge debt burden, how are we okay with that when that's the #1 concern that we've heard from residents?
I guess, and there's another board member here who wants to answer this as well, but I would say that I would agree that taxes are a concern of our community, and the board is not interested in raising taxes and pushing people out of our community. We are interested, though, however, in answering the call to improve our schools. And I would say that we have heard loud and clear that maintenance and fixing our buildings is a high priority. And so what we have tried to do in this process over the 2 years is, again, go from $112 million in terms of all of our needs to what we call the critical infrastructure, right? And put it at a dollar amount. So that dollar amount, right, is the one that's $10 per 100,000 over what you're currently paying, right? And so to us, right, that is something, again, that we've heard from the community is a very, very high priority. Ted said that we've done the first wave of the survey, and so we've gotten about 1,000 results, which is, maybe 15% of our community at this point. And people feel really strongly that we, one, need to go to referendum to address these things, and two, that those critical infrastructure needs need to be addressed. To continue to punt that down punt that to another board, to another village board, doesn't make sense, right? Because that's how we got to where we are now. I understand that there's gonna be an increase in cost, but I think, the benefits in terms of our school, which are one of the top assets in our village, is important as well.
Definitely, I mean, and I think that it sounds to me like the infrastructure piece is really important and the maintenance piece is really important, and I would just be interested to really understand, like, I think that that is a much more palatable option of, you know, maintaining our historic buildings before we're expanding, especially when enrollment is pretty much stagnant. And so with that big tax increase.
And I think, so what came from the first wave of our surveys, that people fell around 65 million? My guess is that we're not going to, when we send out the second wave, given like 60, I doubt we're gonna like move that much higher or that much lower. But there was, again, in the 2.5 years, we talked to a lot of people as well, and I think people feel the same way you do, like addressing the maintenance and the infrastructure needs first, and then thinking about, and people ask about phasing and things like that, and so there might be options to do some of these projects later. But the basic maintenance, I think, are things that are really, we call them critical because they are critical to maintaining our high school district.
So what is our current maintenance budget, especially in comparison to Whitefish Bay's maintenance budget? And why the 275? Like, why, what is that?
Yeah, so you guys have this question.
So our existing maintenance budget is about $480,000. The maintenance budget, and I actually pulled the numbers today, I don't have numbers for the fiscal year 2018 because those numbers are still sitting with auditors and they're not all reported to the Department of Public Instruction yet. But according to last year's fully audited numbers, in Whitefish Bay they spend $1,312 per student on maintenance, and in Shorewood we spend $1,135 per student for maintenance.
What was the short
Shorewood was 1,100 and, I'm sorry, very small numbers, $1,135 per student. And that would be our resident students, so you calculate that number on approximately 880 students.
So this would be the 275 plus the 480, so you'd be up to 700 something.
Correct.
Ongoing maintenance.
What we would like to do with the goal of the 275,000 is that those dollars will go into a dedicated capital maintenance fund that can only be used for capital maintenance. And that fund is allowed to have a fund balance carryover so that we can, I think Dr. Davis provided you with a sample, a 20-year sample of that, where we can pre-plan for large expenses and do regular ongoing maintenance. The benefit of the Fund 40, I believe it's Fund 41, is it also has an advantage to the district because we are a high property value district, which means we are negative tertiary. There's 3 levels of state aid funding, and if we can lower that tertiary amount, that would mean less, a smaller loss to state aid.
So, please help me understand for this 275, I did look at those documents. It appears that if we borrowed $65 million, we'd have new roofs. So typically that sinking fund for capital is in place of the 65 million. I mean, in our realm here, like the sinking fund for the library to buy, every year you put in a certain amount and then when you get enough, you do segments of projects. So buying new roofs under 65 million and then saying for those 10 years, we're gonna do roof repairs under this one.
Actually, if you looked at the spreadsheet that was given to you by Dr. Davis, there's really only one campus that's getting an entire new roof in the 65 million. Other roofs are going to be maintained in sections because so we are the largest purveyor of roof space in the village of Shorewood. if you replace all of those roofs all at once, they're all gonna need to be replaced all at once. And so with so much roof space, we have one school that is at a critical point in time with their roof, so that school building will be replaced. And then other roofs will be maintained so that we can get the maximum amount of life span out of those roofs.
And I just saw roofs in every single year.
Correct, but if you look at the dollar amounts, some of them were relatively small. The two early education centers both need to have their roofs torn off and replaced. And then I believe it was at Atwater Elementary where we were doing significant roof work. The other campuses, the roof work was much less. And then we work with a roof consultant that helps us manage what parts of our roof need to be replaced and what parts of our roof need to be maintained, what we need to do to get the maximum amount of life out of our roof.
Do you have any follow-ups? Trustee Carpenter? Okay. Anybody else have questions?
I'm glad
Trustee
to see
Bowers.
this maintenance fund, because I mean, the
Trustee
village,
Maher.
yeah, the village is laid out, like we went through a whole tuck pointing. Every year you do a different building, and it really does add up, but it pays off in the long term. As I've lived in the village for 24 years and been on the board for 14, I've heard residents talk about the schools as being one of the most important things that they came to the village for, and why they stay in the village. And they have young children, and I have a niece who has to send her child to private school at $25,000 a year. This is that's level of education you get for the amount that the residents pay, especially if they have children. I don't have children. I don't mind paying because I appreciate living in the community with well-educated children. But if you had children, this is a bargain, and it also protects the value of our properties because people want to move. There's a real desire to move to Shorewood, and it keeps our property values high. So if somebody has children, this is a bargain. It really is.
Thank you. Trustee Bockhorst?
So I'm going to do similar to the other trustees, part statement, then question. So the statement is that I appreciate the work that you've done on this. I don't think we've gone out to referendum in what, 8 years?
The last one, yeah.
7 or 8 years?
It will be 8,
Okay, so, and I know even at that time, there was overwhelming support by the community, and it was still identified as not meeting the entire needs of the school district. So I appreciate all the hard work, and I understand this is, a very tricky thing to ask people to pay more. But just like Trustee Carpenter said, when I have gone out to the doors and spoken with people in the community, overwhelmingly I've heard, keep our school district strong. It's the gem of our community. It maintains our property values. It's what most of us moved here for, and a lot of us continue to stay here for. And directly impacts our quality of life. And that's, as a fiduciary here of the entire village, they're the exact same geographical boundaries. So it's important to ensure that not only for the children, everyone's children, and for the community, that we continue to invest in the quality of education as well as the maintenance. So I understand that. And just to say, I've been there. And part of that, a lot of people have mentioned, I know that this is to me, that you're not responsible for the school district directly, but anything you can do indirectly to ensure that the school district remains strong, please do. So I'm really grateful that you're here for that. And so my question being, well, part of it was, when was the last time? The second part was, forgive me, I missed this. What was the, in the survey, because I did not get one, and I understand that many people didn't. However, it sounds like you had a pretty substantial sample sample size.
So the original survey was sent out to, kind of correct me, 3,000 households,
Of the 6,500
Yes.
households in Shorewood?
and we've gotten 1,000 back.
Okay, so you sent out, you received a third of those that were sent. So, and you're planning on sending to the
Mhm.
remaining 3,500-ish? Okay, again, well, kudos to you. That's unheard of as far as surveying 100% of the population. But it also will probably ensure greater success, or whether or not you put it on the ballot. So, And then the other question was, of those that you have received, you said 65 million was the most favorable, the target amount that people were most amenable to?
Yeah, so, and when we have Bill come back, Bill from School Perceptions come back and give us the report for the full survey, we'll send it to you guys so you guys can see. But one of the things he does is he breaks it up into different groups, so parents, of school-age children, and then also, people who live in the district but who don't have children. And he gives those, individuals more weight in some ways because they're, more likely voters, and a larger proportion of our electorate, right? And just the people in our community. So we have a great number of people who live in the community who don't have children. And so they were the ones who fell around 65 million. The other groups were a little bit different, but that was the number that we got from the original first wave of the survey.
And
yeah,
before I call on someone else, we don't have a lot of time. I am going to continue this meeting until it ends. So if there's residents out there that want to ask questions, we will just go into our village board meeting time. Trustee Bockhorst.
Well, I would like a follow-up since you're saying that,
Sure.
because I'm sure this is not the last opportunity for people to voice their opinions on whether or not, I mean, we're not even at the referendum, you haven't even
Right.
decided whether or not this
Yeah.
is going on the ballot. So I would ask that we do have a big, but we have a lot on our agenda tonight.
Got it. Thank you.
So,
Trustee
we'll be
Warren.
And my question kind of dovetails with the trustee Bockhorst's approach that you made right there. First off, I wanted to thank you for coming here tonight and presenting to us. Really appreciate the collaboration. Obviously, as a Atwater, SIS, and SHS grad, the schools are always and will always be near and dear to my heart. I guess my question is just, again, dovetailing with what Trustee Bockhorst just said. Assuming that you do go to referendum, what's the communication plan to communicate what option you've chosen and kind of bring the community in and make sure everyone's well educated prior to making the decision on April 2nd?
I might let Ted come and answer some of this too, but the board's plan really is between January and April to put on a full court press about giving people information about what it means to have this referendum, these referendum questions, potentially 2 questions on there, and what you're actually voting for. Right? We have no reason to hide, right, or give anybody we want people to answer honestly about whether or not they want to do this or not. And so there's a lot of information. I think one of the things that Michelle kind of described is that we have been working on this for a long time, and so we know all these numbers and we have a better sense of this, but we need to communicate this to the rest of the community about what this would actually mean for you, both in terms of your taxes and for your schools, right? Like, what are we actually getting for that money? And so we would spend the next, those 3 months, community forums, there would be lots of mailing, things from the district, and just kind of giving people as much information as possible. We'd love to have, partner with you guys to get some of that information out as well. So, I don't know if I missed anything, Ted?
Trustee Amanda, did you have?
I was just curious, the way the questions were formulated in the survey were sort of like, would you like to pay 10 cents more, 31 cents more, 84 cents more, $1.27 more? Why was there not a question of, would you like to pay $2.13 less? That was never offered and never explained to people that that's an option too.
So there's a first question that I'm not going to remember the exact wording on about whether or not we should go to referendum or not. So explaining again what the needs are of the schools and whether or not people are interested in going for referendum at all. So yeah, we don't have a question that specifically talks about if we don't go to referendum, your taxes will go down. We were trying to use the survey to get information about whether or not people, what kinds of projects people would be interested in, and giving people the cost estimates for those.
Or you didn't
we had already-
feel it was relevant to give people the information that possibly, in the past, the referendum had been like 10 million, 8 million. So if you stayed in that range of what you've historically done, and still did the 275, I mean, it would still probably be, I don't know, $1.75 per
We wouldn't
thousand.
be able to get the work done. What I'm saying to you is that the $55 million, those things are things that can't be pulled apart, that all need to happen, that we don't feel, based on the communication that we've had with both community members and faculty, that that's not something that we're willing to say, like, we're only gonna do, like, law school.
So if you had another $275,000 a year exclusively for capital facilities maintenance, you would not be able to start to address security issues, ADA issues.
We've started to address these things all, the last 10 years as well, from the last referendum. So what we're saying is, as a board and as a community, we don't want to start and then hope to completely address, that we want to give money to actually address those deficit projects in there.
I just also want to say, I mean, we spent $1.5 million redoing the AV data for the police station. And so we have that experience of working at that level of, to spend $55 million in 2 years on 4, that's a huge amount of money. I have a hard time even imagining how that level of spending in construction could happen. Each of these schools would be entirely a construction site for every business for that level of investment. So that's one issue. And I'd like to ask our financial expert, the school district's mill rate of 13.88, where does that fall in comparison to other school districts in the state?
Are you talking about the current one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to run that data.
It's the 5th highest in the state. And if we issue this debt, where would we be in terms of ranking to all other school districts in terms of the total debt?
Total indebtedness?
Yeah.
Well, for
We'd be pretty high up there, if not the top 1 or 2 in terms of debt outstanding.
No, I disagree with that. You just had Wauwatosa pass over 100 million.
I think to clarify, it's not just your debt level, it's your debt level compared to your operating budget. That's.
Or per student, for
Or per
sure.
student.
Because this per student is 34,000 per student, Tosa's and Cedarburg are both like 20,000.
Yeah.
So comparatively
Yeah.
to what Tosa just passed and Cedarburg just passed, we're talking 34,000 per student compared to 20,000.
Yeah, that's an interesting metric. I will say that
Already at a district that has a mill rate that is one of the top, is the 5th highest in the state. So I just wish that in the information that was presented, some of these, because as Trustee Carpenter pointed out, tax rate, I think there's some in the village who feel like we can pay whatever in taxes and it doesn't matter, we'll just write a blank check. But that attitude is changing. And there's always been older people, especially widowed people, who have to sell their house and leave. And that's never a pleasant prospect for people. But I think there's a lot of concern that younger families, in terms of, we've already had assessments and housing prices go way up between the increase in our housing prices and now we keep increasing taxes. I think it's just building barriers. And if there's one thing, that all of us, I think, appreciate, in addition to our great schools, is that we're a diverse community and we'd like to stay that way. So that's all I have to say.
So I've prepared a list of what I wanted to ask about. Going off of what Trustee Menta said, first I want to thank the school district because I think you guys do one of the most fabulous jobs at educating our students. So I've been really pleased. I have a son in the school system and I'm very, very thankful that he goes here at Shorewood. I also want to, right off the bat, say that anything I say does not mean I don't want a referendum. I think that we need a referendum because we all have aging buildings in this village and we need to upgrade them at some point. We need to upgrade our buildings for ADA. We need to upgrade our windows for ADA. We deal with the elderly coming to meetings and, those things are really important and handicapped for us all to be doing, even in Milwaukee County. So we have 5 taxing jurisdictions on, each of us pay 2 on our tax bill. My concern is that since we all have the same facility needs, I know it's great to say you don't care about the kids, or if you care about the kids, you should borrow it all at one time so we can fix it all at one time. So that's the part that is astonishing me because Milwaukee County could borrow $400 million tomorrow on the same tax bill and fix the infrastructure that's killing children when it falls on them. So, you know, Milwaukee County, instead of 3,000 workers in social welfare, are now down to like 300. So we have more kids staying in households where they're getting beat. And to me, those children I care about. So should they borrow down that much, the amount of $400 million in a 5-year time frame and spend it? We all have that ability because I care about those children as well. I just don't think, I mean, they could do it tomorrow if we all took that attitude. And I think that's why I thank you for coming here, just so we can share if we have any concerns in public, because I truly think from the bottom of my heart, we've got 3 costs in front of us, $275,000 in additional operating. There's no guarantee that'll go to maintenance, but that's
No,
Yeah.
it has to go into
Okay.
a fund.
so it's $60 a household. $65 million over a 24-year period is almost $1,000 per household, not taking into what you're retiring. And then we raised taxes this year. We raised ours by $62,000 if we adopt our budget tonight. The schools raised it $840,000. So we're all taxing the same people. My biggest concern as the village president here is not for the 2,000 people we all know, the 2,000 people that are always active, but the 10,000 people that don't participate because they're working or they're busy or they feel their voice isn't going to matter. And that's the people that 50% of our village, it makes a household income of $50,000 or less. 50% of our village. And that's why we move here, because we endear to have that diversity in our community. And so my honest to God, from the bottom of my heart, I am really concerned, and I did state this at this first meeting. We have duplex owners that are owner occupied here. They own their own duplexes and they can barely make it. You give them another $640 on their taxes, we're gonna get some absentee landlords now.
Can I ask where the 640 comes from?
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact amount, but it was in the 600 when we added, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
That's the total, it's not an addition.
The
Right,
addition
it's-
is like $30 to $90 for the first level, and then it goes up, the maximum was,
150.
yeah, 150.
So 65 million per household over 20, is about 1,000 per household in additional taxes, in taxes.
Oh,
You know?
No.
Compared to-
Over, even?
Compared to, yeah, not
Yeah,
compared to
relative
current.
to current.
Say that again, Mark.
So the delta, the increase in this year is only, is what we're talking about. What you're talking about is if we went for the baseline of what, compared against the decrease in taxes. But that's, the net new dollars is, will be 30 to whatever.
The net new dollars is the 670.
Yes,
And then you're
correct.
subtracting out what we're
Retiring,
retiring.
right. But
So
for
if
that
you're
amount
only
of-
looking at this debt, you're talking about the 670,
Is it-
plus whatever increase happens each year, which this year is about 200 outside of the referendum.
Next time, we'll just have to go to the microphone, okay?
Sorry.
That's okay. So anyways, so my concern is for those people that make under 50,000 a year. I too went door to door in April, and I can tell you there's a big swing. People are really feeling that they cannot afford another dime. We worked very hard to accomplish that this year. We raised taxes by $16. I also feel, you know, people say, well, we want our schools to be attractive to the young families. Young families can't afford to live here anymore if this tax rate moves forward. So in general, I'm 100% in support of a referendum. I too have huge concerns over what I heard about construction management and the oversight of $65 million in a 2-year spend down. I'm glad to hear that that's a possibility, that we could get that far, but I mean, when we spend even $2 million on a facility, we have a construction management firm. It's not us, you know, overseeing this. We
That's what
really-
we would have,
That's what you have, okay.
yes.
And I too agree that it's a lot of interest to be drawing down on day one. So if there was a referendum, I think the highest referendum the schools have ever done was 12 million, right around, over. And so I don't see a problem, and I get it, with doing $20 million of work in the next 5 to 10 years. and then asking the residents, do you want to do 20 more million? 65 million, again, I started the conversation with, we all could borrow that and fix our facilities. I do cherish that these are kid facilities, so I guess that makes it different, but people want their roads done and they want their sewers fixed so that we're, so we have to schedule ours out. This is a very big tax impact over a long period of time. I also wonder about furniture, like what really is capital versus operating maintenance? I mean, the purchase of furniture, I feel for our kids, our grandkids in 24 years when the debt is still outstanding, yet you can't purchase a new computer because the lifespan of computer or furniture is like 4 years.
You wanna, maybe, there's a
Sure.
couple of things that maybe you wanna explain about, or
Yeah, I mean, Patrick could probably help me with this too from a technology standpoint. I mean, I guess one, this decision can be made by the community. So none of this gets decided unless, that's why we survey. Right, so,
And I want to thank you just
and
because
put it on the ballot,
I
so.
forgot to say this. I see that there was a lot of engagement of what our facility needs were. I'm
Right.
hoping that the next segment before a referendum will be really getting down to what the financing is. Because I saw that,
Absolutely.
but I feel like the general population might want to.
Yeah, no doubt, yeah, and certainly from a communication standpoint, we'll have likely open houses at each building, so we can walk through and see, what our needs are. We'll make sure that we're, Michelle will be active with us, and Patrick, to make sure that we're walking through the nuances of their financing and make sure that people understand it. So from a technology standpoint, again, what we have on here is infrastructure for technology, so making sure we got enough bandwidth, that type of thing. So devices are not something that would go on here. So we're not gonna finance out computers that would last, 5 years, for example. We haven't gotten, feedback on furniture. That was something that we have looked at. That's definitely something that we can refine down, again, as we're talking to people and making that kind of final decision. Furniture might be something that comes out. So again, these are conversations that are ongoing, as we're moving forward for the scope of things. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that we're not, the perception isn't that we're burdening for 24 years and that kids won't get computers, until, in the 2040s, because that's not realistic.
So you'll purchase those from the 275?
No, that's in maintenance, so that would be through our operational budget, as we execute our technology plan, which is kind of a different conversation, but that's something that, again, as we look at textbooks, as we look at paper, as we look at those things evolving for school districts, it's something that we look at from a technology standpoint. But that's separate from this conversation that we're having here. We just want to make sure that we have the infrastructure set, we have buildings that were built in 1915, 1925, 1935, and even 1960s, or 1970s, that we have the infrastructure set, that we can have, wireless devices, that we have that support, and that we need. So that's what's in
Yeah,
here.
I think all of Milwaukee County is kind of going through.
Yeah, so that's what would be technology-wise in here. I just want to be clear. And again, these are conversations that we'll have much more of the details once we get some guidance from the community about which direction that we should head. Once we get that, I mean, it's somewhat early to have the conversations. Once we get to that point, then we'll be able to drill down. Again, we have from January 22nd is the very last day that the board can pass a resolution to go to referendum for April 2nd. So we would have, at the very latest, January 22nd through April 2nd to be able to make sure that we have as much information out there as possible. So,
Thank you.
Patrick, did you have anything to add?
It's okay, I got it.
Okay,
All
sorry.
right, thanks. So I guess I'll just close out by saying there are significant, the reason that I think it's great that we're coordinating tonight and as we go forward, continue coordinating is because I feel there will be significant impacts on our community with an increase of debt service on 65 million. I also, every year, this year the school increased their taxes, just their regular taxes this year by $840,000. That's $190 per household. So the three levels of an additional $275,000, an additional $65 million, and the additional annual increases, I am very concerned. I just feel there's some unintended consequences that sometimes a survey really can't get to, like residents don't have, it's not that they're not being educated, and I'm not saying anyone's not doing a great job at reaching out, but again, we usually get 3,000 people that are involved, and then you've got this whole mass of Shorewood that's not. And there's, communication methods haven't gotten easier, even like in elections, it's really hard to even get to those people. So those are the people that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the people that continue to bring the diversity in Shorewood that we want to be here. With that, I am done. Trustee Miller.
Yeah, the increase this year is 4.1%. Do you have some idea what your projections are on like future years out? Is this an unusual year, or is this?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, Patrick and I put that together every year. It's a little hard to say, and especially now when we're in a little bit different dynamic politically with the result of the governor's race. Because historically what's happened from a state standpoint is at least since 2010, we've been kind of a cut mode. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, obviously, we have split government at the state level, so which I think usually leads to better ideas and more lively conversations. So that'll happen. So our next biennial budget is will be coming up in 2019, 2021. So I would say we're not really sure where that's going to land necessarily, because a lot of that depends on state state support that we would get. We're encouraged by certainly having the current state superintendent who understands school financing. I would say one example of that we're looking at from a legislative priority is just the support that we get for special ed funding. So right now we're reimbursed at about a 24% rate. Everything over, so let's say $11,000 for example is our per pupil support that we get, or that we spend per student. For our special education students, our most needy students, we need some extra support, so aids or extra resources, that type of thing. So right now, the way we currently are set up, we've gone from historically about 60% reimbursement for that extra money beyond the $11,000 that we spend to about 25% of reimbursement from the state. At the same time, we've got private schools that are getting reimbursed 100% up to $18,000 per student. And then for any dollar that's spent over $18,000 per student, the state is reimbursing them at 90%. 90% of the money is being reimbursed for the kids that have the most needs, that are in families that are in the most dire straits. That's significant. So our board has been forward in sending a resolution to the state, and I know our governor-elect understands that. That would result in a $2.1 million increase for state funding for Shorewood if we got up to that 90% as we're moving forward.
Just to summarize then, it would be, we're not sure yet, based on.
That's correct. So that's just an example of that. That's how not sure we are, because there's some real significant issues that have changed, that have gone on, and I think been kind of the undercurrent to undercut public education in our schools, and we see those effects right now. So I just don't want to underestimate just the seismic nature of what we've been working with for the last 8 years, and what, again, we don't expect a tsunami of money and everybody will be happy, but we do expect some fundamental changes in values being able to come that could make significant differences. And then we can't, I'm sorry, but then so therefore, to that point, we're not sure, but we'll be working through that.
Have you been using the facilities maintenance in your operating budget, the 7, whatever you have, or whatever that number was? Are you using that for operations right now, the 480,000?
So that's been whittled away. No, so that's our maintenance. That would be within our maintenance budget. So that's been decreasing over time though, because we've had to shift money into our operations. And then
right?
this as we've been working through it.
So everything is going into operations.
Right. So this is part of our pushing.
No
pushing
decrease. Okay. Trustee Bachhorst.
Oh, were you waiting? Well, I want to say that's the first time in a long time I've heard optimistic news regarding state funding of public schools and education. So for anyone here, like that is an incredibly big deal. We've been the other way for so many years, and as expenses continue to rise, cost of doing business continues to rise, just like with us at the village level every year. State funding's been flat or decreasing. So this is the first time. Maybe, and again, we have a split government, so the likelihood of anything drastic or a tsunami of incoming cash is probably pretty nil,
right.
But at least there's.
Yeah, hopefully we can.
Trustee McKay, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from the residents?
Well, that was my point, is, this is a great discussion, and I really appreciate it. It's kind of a luxury to have you guys bring this presentation to us, since you've been, sponsoring it in the community for so long. And, I am concerned about the length of our agenda tonight, and so even though I don't want to limit, discussion, since this isn't for action, and there are going to be many months ahead of us, and the community ultimately is going to decide this, which I think is, a great thing about our system.
Do you want to
I
make
just-
a motion to what you want to happen? That's parliamentary procedure.
No, I just wanted to ask for your, we could stop at 7:30 for our village board meeting. So at 7:30, I'm happy to make a motion. I'm not gonna end POW right now.
How does the rest of the board feel about that?
We have a lot to discuss this evening. We have a budget, we have a lot on the agenda, and this will be, there are many other meetings that are going to take place. Everyone here can contact us at any time. And also, we did have 92% voter turnout, so there will be a lot of people voting on this.
Great, so if we go over, I'll wait for the motion. Does anyone have any questions? That would solve it, right?
I was gonna ask a question, but I feel bad now, so I'm
Surprise.
Do you have to go up and state your name and address, email address, sir?
Yeah, we have 13 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm Kate Casper, address 4330 North Alpine Avenue. I'm a parent of 4 children, including one student at Lake Bluff Elementary. And my question relates to something that David was discussing earlier. The survey did come out with just showing an increase in the mill rate from passing a referendum. It did not show what would happen to the mill rate when the referendum was passed. And I believe that the logical conclusion of anybody reviewing that survey, without reviewing it carefully, would be to assume that the mill rate would drop by just 10 cents or $10 per $100,000 if we did not pass the referendum. So my question is, it's multi-part, but I'd like to know, first of all, what is the specific charge of the consulting firm that the school district hired in conjunction with evaluating this referendum? And second of all, I'd like to know what the plan is to clarify that to the voting public.
Sorry, can you clarify what the consulting firm?
Yes, I don't know the name of the firm, but I'm speaking specifically about the firm that this woman sitting in the front row came to.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can get back to you on that.
Underpaid.
I'd have to get back to you on the number of it.
Well, the first part about just taxes would go down if the referendum doesn't pass, completely agree with you. So stating that in the survey, you know, what surveys are trying to get at, like I said, are one number. I would love to put millions of numbers on a page. This is utopia to me. I love this.
That's actually confusing to me.
But it is confusing to a lot of people, and if you're trying to get at an answer in a survey, you know, this is often not palatable. I think they tried to lay out showing how the debt would go down. That was shown on the first page, or one of the first pages of the survey, I believe. And then again, this was linked in the survey, so you could go to this page. I think this is clear, you know, the decrease in the debt portion of the tax bill, kind of showing you that those black bars would go down, these would wrap around them, and that will continue to be discussed throughout the referendum process. But I think that's really all I can say on that point, is trying to be, put out as much information as possible, but yet balance that with trying to be concise in a survey, linking the data for people that want more. Our fee would be, is in a contract that the district has executed. It depends on the amount that passes and if it passes. So we don't charge anything if a referendum is not successful. We've been working with the district for, I don't even know how many years, just kind of working through planning with no fee attached to that. So that said, I'm here for information only. I'm not here to advocate how anybody votes. Just the mathematician, and that's what we do. Wanted to clear up one other point in terms of phasing. I don't envision 65 million being borrowed in one day and spent in 2 years. This will be phased probably over the course of a 5-year period, where we have one bond issue in 1 year, followed by the execution of a series of projects, and then another bond issue possibly 2 or 3 years later. So if a referendum is
Can I ask a question about
successful,
that? Because
yes.
I don't think that's what the facility manager said, was they were gonna do the design for all of them, all the facilities at once, and then bid them all out.
Yeah.
So it might be different, but I do remember, and you
Yeah.
can only draw down twice, correct?
No, you have 5 years to borrow the money that is approved in any way, fashion that you want to. So what we would do is if there was a successful referendum, which we worked on a number of them that passed this November, the first thing we ask for is that drawdown schedule of when money will be spent. And then we kind of model the borrowings around that. So weighing interest rate exposure, weighing the tax rate that was discussed at referendum, weighing all of those things, and coming up with a solution. But ultimately, I don't see 65 million being borrowed in one day and spent necessarily over a 2-year period after that. I think you're probably looking at 4 years of disruption, because most of the work, there's not like a new freestanding building going up. But you're looking at, moving around within buildings over a period of time.
Yeah, what Patrick was talking about is the length of time that you go through that process. So if you've got to do that multiple times, it might be over a 5-year period of time. Again, it's a little bit early right now. The biggest thing for us now is to be able to get feedback from the community. Once we would get past that January 22nd mark, where we would get some direction from the community and from the board, then Patrick will be able to very specifically outline kind of what project we're going after, what that timeline is. And that, we just want to be able to give you just some estimates. So we'll be able to get you that at a later point.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Mine? Michelle Weiber?
Yeah, I think one thing that you could improve that graph would be to just add a bar right before the one that is increasing 10 cents.
Sure.
That shows the diffusing portion of the mill rate going away, and nothing. And just show that as an option. Are you technically a financial advisor to the school district?
Yes.
So you do have a fiduciary duty to the school district? Yes, you do. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Zovic?
Hi, Paul Zovic, 2504 East Newton. When I was reviewing your budget, and I know you guys are going to talk about that later, I was very interested in your capital plans, specifically the huge increase in sewer projects that we'll see in a few years for the corner of the district, of the village with the combined sewers. And I know that's not coming down for a couple of years, but I would hope, and this is addressed both to the district and the village, when you think about a 2019 referendum and possible projects 2020 through 2024, that's about the time I think that your sewer projects are going to be coming online. And to the extent, and I know you'll probably do this anyways, but I feel obligated to ask formally, to the extent maybe you can think about sequencing and scheduling in cooperation with your sequencing and scheduling, so that we don't have this larger than necessary. Maybe some project can be moved to earlier before your big bump with sewer projects. I know all the folks on my side of town that are serviced by combined sewers are very, very anxious to see the flooding abatement progress.
Thank you for saying that. I think that was the point. With our sewer work, it was, say the total is 50 million, we could have borrowed it all on day one. So I do think it's, we phased it over a 10-year period just because we don't want to hit the taxpayers with that much debt service. But I completely agree with Mr. Zovic that was the intent, one of the intents I asked for this presentation, because we've got, just like Milwaukee County does, on your tax bill and M&SD, and we've got major capital projects that we need to be able to time, because we've got over 50 million in capital projects that we could borrow tomorrow. So I think it's to the residents' benefit that we you know, we have 55 million in water mains that we have to do, and we can't even get to those. We're just doing a few at a time, so. Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Wilson, and then Carla.
Pat Wilson, 4451 North Ardmore. I don't think anybody doubts that the school district is really doing their best for our kids. We moved here 5 years ago because of the reputation of the Shorewood School District.
You want to address me?
What's that?
You can look at me, go ahead. Just so you know.
It's really difficult, I think, for most people to know when looking at these numbers, whether they're good numbers or not. You know, if you look at 65 million, I don't know if that's a reasonable number for the types of things you're trying to get done. So I look for evidence of what's reasonable for the community to pay, and that's what I found missing in the survey was evidence of what's reasonable. So my question is, as a percentage of total budget, what is normal to be paying for debt load? At one point, the school district was paying, I think, you know, at a point 5-10 years ago, was paying about $1.2 million a year in debt load, and has recently increased that to something greater than $4.5 million a year. So it's moved from like 6% to maybe over 20%, and I think this referendum would continue that high level, and it's unclear to me what's reasonable.
Well, yeah, I think you're currently about 20% of the total levy. I gotta go to this one. This is really hard to figure out.
I know.
But about 20% of the total levy is for debt service. I think of the K-12 districts in Milwaukee County, that puts you right about in the middle right now. And that's before we had Oak Creek pass another referendum, Wauwatosa passed a referendum, Greendale just passed a referendum in November. So all of those are shifting. But keep in mind that the level that the levy is at, for 55 million, for example, the debt service levy wouldn't change much. You know, you've already sort of loaded on a payment, you're prepaying debt with that payment, but I don't want to say that's absorbed, but it doesn't rise, you know, from that level, because it's kind of there already.
Well, it's already gone up, so
Correct.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I'm saying that's kind of put you in the middle of the pack in Milwaukee County. Statewide, I'm not sure, but it's not unreasonable to be in that range.
Any other questions? Yes.
Katie Hesbergen, I have a couple of additional questions. First of all, I'm curious to know what sort of accountability measures are in place for this sum of money once it is approved in referendum. In other words, how do we keep track of how it's spent? Who's accountable for that process? Who's accountable for it being held to budget and paying for the things that it's supposed to pay for? Associated with that question, I'm also curious to know, I understand that the additional amount that the referendum is requesting for maintenance must be dedicated exclusively for maintenance. But I'm curious to know what would prevent the school district from taking the existing maintenance budget and reducing that in order to offset it.
I can speak to the first one if you don't mind. Yep. So I would say to answer the first question, the IRS would kind of make sure that you're spending the funds, you're borrowing tax exempt debt. As such, you have to follow very stringent rules as it relates to that you're spending it on the public purpose that you specified at referendum. So a combination of IRS regulations related to tax exempt debt would govern the use of the funds, as well as bond counsel who scripts the question to go to referendum that would be on the ballot, making sure that only projects included in that are what is being paid for.
Can I just expand, just to clarify, because you might have a more clear answer. So right now, you borrowed 65 million, and bids, when you get to that bidding process, comes in, and the bid for the work is 45 million. We had that happen on one of our roads recently, went down significantly. I guess the question is who, it's not the IRS, it's gonna say, what are you gonna do with that extra 20 million? It's gotta be more internal than that of
Sure.
what projects get funded.
Yeah, so that would be an internal discussion by the school board. The funds can only be spent on what was described in the question, so you couldn't do something totally different than what was described in the referendum question, so that governs what it is spent on. But an improvement at Lake Bluff, you could do a different improvement at Lake Bluff if you decide that would be at the board level. It just can't be spent on something, again, different than what the referendum question said. If there is truly funds left over and there's not a need for those funds, and there's nothing that by the law of the question that would dictate, the two, you either pay off debt with the funds. That's really the only thing. You either pay it out, you either spend it on the project or you pay off debt that was issued. So you start prepaying the loan that you issued for the project. You give it back, essentially.
Trustee.
And also just to expand on that, I imagine that you either have or you build some sort of audit function so you could look back on how the money was spent and really quantify what your expenditures were throughout the.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to track every dollar in a segregated account, so that is absolutely done, yes.
Oh, did
Then
that
keep to the speak to
Oh,
the
okay.
270, the
I
maintenance.
just want to clarify one thing. So that means that unless every detail of the plan is specifically described in the referendum question, which I imagine would make for a very long ballot at the election day, there is no way to actually hold us to what is described, for example, in the packets and documents that are distributed outside of the ballot itself.
No. Yeah, so you can go to any facilities, if the wording of the question is facilities maintenance, I think the answer is
Yeah, but I think the point of doing the survey and to get the priorities is not to say we're gonna do, everybody said they wanna do Lake Bluff, but parents are gonna do the auditorium building. The whole purpose of that was to get a sense of what the community wants and to really prioritize it, right? So when people say that they're most important of those projects, what's most important to them, that gives us an answer to that. And we would have, prior to April, more information about what exactly would fall within that. You're right, it wouldn't be on the ballot question. But there would be the expectation that the board would hold the district to that this is what we said we were going to do. And if for some reason, miraculously, there was $20 million extra in there, then yeah, we can make a decision. As I said, there's $90 million of work to be done. So if we could decide to do some more work or give the money back.
thank you.
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
So with regards to the board being able to, since we have this 275,000, can we start dropping the other budget? There's no legal recourse for us to, law that we can't do that. But that being said, the $275,000 is intended for capital maintenance. So those are going to be usually big ticket items that are going to be planned for, summer projects where we're going to, bid jobs out in the winter time so that as soon as school's out, we can hit those. The roughly $480,000 that we have budgeted for maintenance, we still have day-to-day maintenance that we're going to need to take care of.
Painting?
What's that?
Like painting or?
Well, painting, we have a drinking fountain that breaks, we have a toilet that breaks, we have, there's always maintenance, there's lawns to be mowed and shrubs to be trimmed, and, there's a lot of additional stuff. What we're looking for the 275 is to allow the district the money to go ahead and do capital maintenance that will prevent higher expenses in the future. For example, if you don't do your tuck pointing, then you're going to have, instead of doing $10,000 a year in tuck pointing, all of a sudden you're going to have, a chimney that's ready to fall down or in considerable expense. So it's going to allow us to maintain our infrastructure in a more planned manner, as opposed to a triage manner that you have when your budgets are tight. You go over where the greatest hurt is. And that's not It's not a good plan. So what we're proposing is a plan, not just to do it by triage.
And you have like schedules, like the village, like here's the schedules for tuck pointing for the next 10 years, here's the schedules for.
That's one of the documents that I attached, is kind of a 20-year cycle of that.
What we would be
That was
putting,
way,
say
that's
again?
really broad, that was like 100,000 for,
Right, well, I didn't want to give you the detail.
I
the
love
detail-
details,
the-
you can send them away.
That's fine. Those are things that we're working through.
Okay. Thank you. Just make it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Motion carries for the 12 weeks. That's what I was thinking.
Can I just say, thank you, from
Yeah, thank you so much for
for
coming.
and, I think December 11th is when we'll be sharing, additional survey results. And we'll invite you to the next, school board meeting, where we'll talk about this.
Great, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck.
Oh, okay.